Have you ever really stopped and looked at the things you buy? We're all part of this giant global marketplace, right? But the way stuff actually moves around the world is, well, it's a little strange when you think about it. Today, we're going to unravel a fascinating economic puzzle that's happening all around us every single day. And it all kicks off with a simple question about golf. Okay, so here's the thing that just doesn't seem to make any sense at first glance. Take golf clubs. The United States imports a ton of them from countries like Japan. But, and here's the weird part, at the very same time, the US is exporting thousands of its own golf clubs back to Japan. Why? Wouldn't it be way simpler, way more efficient to just make your own stuff? And this isn't just some quirky fact about golf clubs. No, this two-way street of trade is a massive, defining feature of our modern global economy. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly why it happens, and more importantly, what it means for all of us. I mean, look at this. It's not a one-off thing at all. You can see this huge overlap between who the US buys from and who it sells to. Japan, Mexico, Canada. Yep, a bunch of the same countries are on both lists. Economists actually have a name for this. They call it intra-industry trade, and it is way more common than you'd probably guess. So what's the deal? The key to cracking this puzzle is a really powerful idea called monopolistic competition. It's a way of looking at the world that does a much, much better job of explaining modern trade than some of the older theories, which kind of assumed all goods were basically identical. To get it, we really just need to wrap our heads around two core concepts. First up, differentiated goods. So unlike super basic stuff like wheat or iron ore, most things we buy are similar, but they're not identical. A tailor-made golf driver is not the same as a Callaway driver. A BMW is not a Toyota. This little bit of difference gives each company its own kind of mini monopoly on its specific product, which means they have some control over the price. Second thing we need is this idea of increasing returns to scale. Now that sounds super technical, but I promise you it's simple. Just imagine a bakery. The biggest single cost is that giant, expensive oven. It doesn't matter if you bake 1 loaf of bread or 1,000, you still had to buy the oven. So the more bread you bake, the more you can spread out that huge initial cost, and the cheaper each individual loaf becomes to make. And this isn't just a vague idea. You can see it plain as day in the numbers. Look at this. As the quantity produced shoots up from 5 to 40, the average cost gets cut by almost half. A company that can sell to a huge market can make things way, way more cheaply than a company that's only selling to a small one. That drive for efficiency, it's a massive force in the global economy. So those two concepts, having unique products and getting cheaper costs by making more stuff, they are the real engine of this whole theory. All told, the model we're using to solve our golf club riddle is built on 4 key assumptions. Right, so we've covered the first and third ones, different products, and the cost advantage of making a lot. The model also assumes that there are many different companies competing, not just a couple of giants. And critically, new companies can jump into the market pretty easily if they think they can make a profit. These 4 rules create a really dynamic, competitive environment. Okay, so we've got the theory down. Now let's put it to work. Let's run a little thought experiment. Imagine 2 identical countries. Each one has its own companies making similar but distinct products. What happens the very moment they decide to tear down the borders and trade freely with each other? Instantly, the entire game changes. For every single company, the number of potential customers they can sell to just doubled. But, and this is a huge but, the number of competitors they have to face also just doubled. All of a sudden, you're not just competing with the shop across town, you're competing with a company clear across the ocean. And this, of course, sparks an all-out price war. To try and grab a piece of this huge new pie, companies start slashing their prices. The trouble is, with so many new choices available, all of us consumers become way more sensitive to price. This competition can get so intense that it actually drives prices down so low that companies start losing money on every single thing they sell. Inevitably, in this brutal new world, not everyone is going to make it. The firms that are a little less efficient, maybe the ones with slightly higher costs or a product that's just not as appealing, they simply can't survive. They're forced to close up shop. But, and here's the flip side, for the companies that do survive, the rewards are incredible. They get to scoop up all the customers from the businesses that went under. They're now selling to a massive global market, which lets them scale up production and become unbelievably efficient, just like our bakery, making thousands of loads of bread. So let's just recap what just happened here. For us, the consumers, this is a massive win. We get lower prices because the companies that are left are super efficient. And even though some of our local brands might have vanished, we now have access to all the brands from the other country, so our overall product variety just goes through the roof. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds like a neat theory, right? But does it happen in the real world? Well, we actually have a massive real-world experiment that tested these exact ideas, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which got started back in 1994. The debate over NAFTA's impact was, and honestly still is, incredibly intense. One very powerful perspective, summed up here by former Congressman David Bonnier, really focuses on the painful side of this adjustment. The argument is that opening up trade encouraged U.S. companies to move production to Mexico, which led to a lot of American workers losing their jobs. But, of course, there's another side to the coin. Economist Adam Posen points to the benefits we just talked about in our model. Consumers got a big win from lower prices, and as the most efficient American companies grew by selling to Canada and Mexico, they had the potential to create new and maybe different kinds of jobs. So, when we actually look at the data for Canada, we see our theory play out almost perfectly. There was definitely a painful shock at the beginning, with major job losses in certain industries. But over time, new jobs were created, the country's overall productivity went up, and that led to a modest but real increase in wages for Canadian workers. Mexico's story, though, is a lot more complicated. Productivity absolutely skyrocketed in the factories that were focused on exporting. But, partly because of a huge currency crisis that happened around the same time, those efficiency gains didn't lead to higher wages for most workers. In fact, their real wages actually fell. The benefits were really concentrated among the higher-income workers. So let's bring all this home. This new way of looking at trade really shines a light on a fundamental trade-off. It creates very clear winners and very clear losers, and that's exactly why these debates get so passionate. The gains, the good stuff, are spread very widely across the whole population. As consumers, every one of us benefits from lower prices on everything from cars to clothes to, yes, golf clubs. We get an incredible amount of choice, and the economy as a whole gets stronger with more productive companies. But the costs, even if they're smaller overall, are highly concentrated, and they are deeply, deeply personal. If you're a worker at one of those companies that just couldn't compete and had to shut down, you lose your job. And while an economist might call that a temporary adjustment cost, for the person, the family, and the community that it happens to, the pain is anything but temporary. It's very, very real. And that leaves us with the big, final question. It's not really about whether trade creates wealth. Our model's pretty clear that it does. The real question is a societal one. How do we as a society balance the widespread benefits of more choice and lower prices against the very concentrated, very painful costs that are paid by the people whose jobs get displaced? There's no easy answer to that at all.